The microphone that I normally wear that goes on my face hangs down here. Dennis Graham took it to London this weekend to see if he can get it fixed because that one, every time I turn my head this way, it stops. So we got the little lapel one this morning. Can you hear me okay? We all right? Good. So at the community lunch this week on Thursday morning, I was talking with the folks there about that first parable we heard this morning. The one about Jesus talking about the sower and the seed. And I was realizing that when Jesus first told that story, likely everybody in the crowd that heard him would have had significant agricultural experience. He was in small villages and towns. He talked mostly with working class peasants, day laborers, who either would have kept a garden for themselves or would have worked on other people's farms. So they knew all about seed. They knew all about sowing seeds. And they would know what we would realize, that seed is a precious commodity. In order to be able to plant in the spring, you'd either have to reserve seed from an earlier harvest, or you'd have to buy the seed from someone else. Either way, it wasn't cheap. It was precious. You'd have to be careful with it. So people familiar with the hard practicalities of life, this image of the sower just casting seed willy-nilly, not concerned about where it lands, whether it lands on the road or in the rocks or in the weeds, they would think, what a stupid farmer. What the heck's going on in this story? Because we would know better. What farmer would be so wasteful? Of course, the seed that falls on the road is not going to sprout. The ground there would be hard. The seed would just bounce off the dirt or be blown away unless birds swooped down and ate it for lunch. Of course, the seed that lands in the gravel is not going to survive. It would need the insulation, the moisture, the nutrients the soil could provide to keep it from withering and dying before it grew to anything. Of course, seed tossed among weeds is not going to do well. It might come up a little bit, but then the weeds there would compete with the tiny little baby plant for moisture, for nutrients, for sunlight. Of course, seed that falls on good earth that's been prepared is going to do better. It will come up with a flourish and make a marvelous harvest. At the end of that little story, Jesus says, are you listening to this? Really listening? There's another version of the story in the Gospels where he says, if you have ears to hear, which I like because it was corn seed. I know, it's a corny joke. When Jesus says, are you listening? Do you have ears to hear? I think it's his way of saying, you really need to listen to this one. You should ponder. There's more going on in this story than just a story about some guy throwing seed. Most of the time, when Jesus told parables, there would be something else going on. He didn't just tell stories to hear his own voice. There would always be a twist, a surprise in the story. The moment in the story when you go, what the heck? Is this story what I thought it was? Whenever we encounter a weird moment in one of Jesus' stories, that's a sign we need to take a closer look. Listen carefully to what's really going on in the story. What's he really talking about? So, was Jesus really talking about a farmer who was careless, reckless with the seed, basically throwing most of it away? Because if you hear the story, a quarter of it lands on the road. A quarter of it lands in the gravel. A quarter of it lands amongst the weeds. So not much is left of all the seed being tossed out to grow a good crop. Would a farmer really do that? Any farmers here? Anybody farm? Anybody keep a garden? So when you're planting, would you deliberately throw away 75% of your seed? And if you did, what would your wife think? What would the banker think? What would your neighbors think? They think you lost it. Not just the seed. They think you didn't know what you were doing. Casting seed so it literally flies off to places where anyone with common sense could see it's not going to thrive would be wildly wasteful, impractical, ridiculous, unless Jesus isn't really talking about a farmer. Unless Jesus isn't really talking about seed. One of the things that brings us back here every Sunday is the reminder we get when we gather together that God loves each person. That God loves every one of us. No matter what our own opinion of ourselves is, no matter what people tell us about ourselves, no matter what's happened in the world, in our lives, God, who knows us, loves each person. Even those who feel trodden down by life, like they've been walked on, like a road or a path. Even those who may feel like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Even those who don't feel like they have the luxury or space in their lives to grow. Even the ones who are all mean and thorny on the outside. You know, plants have thorns and brambles to protect themselves. When you meet a prickly person who's throwing out all these spikes, sharp comments, all those get away from me things, you wonder, what vulnerability, what pain, what's happened in their lives to make them so thorny? What part of themselves are they trying to keep safe? God loves them. God loves the people who are like shallow soil that might need a little development. Maybe they need a little fertilizer mixed in there. Working up before life could really thrive. So this apparently wasteful sowing method of the farmer just casting seed off in places where it's never going to do any good, we can see that as a powerful image of God, who has a limitless supply of seed. God's not worried about running out. God makes the seed. So God can afford to cast it out there with abandon. Instead of fretting over whether it lands on the road or in the gravel or in the weeds or shallow ground, this sower can just keep putting it out there as much as needed. I'm very grateful that we had this special moment this morning where Jeff and Bill could sing for us, sing Bringing in the Sheaves. Old gospel song, good old song. They sang it because I asked for it. That's pretty cool. Yeah, thank you for doing that. My favorite line in that old gospel song, can you guess? Based on where we've gone so far? Sowing seeds of kindness. That's why I picked that song, because that's the deal. Sowing seeds of kindness. If the seeds that are being tossed out willy-nilly are kindness, love, respect, generosity, then how lovely it is to think that the sower offers them to everyone, regardless of what kind of soil they seem to be. Whether or not the places the seed lands are ready to receive it, what's being thrown out there is kindness, love, respect. Even if the soil can't receive the gift and do anything with it, just keep tossing it out there. So, if God is the sower, and the seeds are symbols of God's love, seeds of kindness, then the inner logic of this parable would suggest what? That we're the soil. I guess a more crude way to say would be to say that we're the dirt. What an earthy, messy idea. In this story, we're being compared to the stuff that gets under our fingernails. The stuff we try not to track into the house. That's why so many people have mud rooms, right? The room you go through, strip everything off, and then go into the house and be nice. But the soil is also what supports life, allows plants to grow, and all the creatures that depend on the plants thrive because of what grows. So I may have said this here before, the word human, it's a Latin word. It's come into English, but this is true in several languages. The word for human comes from the same word family as humus. What's humus? Dirt, soil. So when you think about that, think about the story, in Genesis, that story where the Creator is making humans. What are humans made out of? What happens in the story? The Creator grabs a handful of clay, dirt, and forms it. Beautiful, evocative images in that story. They were formed of the earth. And then there's the breath of the Spirit. God breathes life into the dirt and makes us. Breath is spirit, soil is matter. So humans are dirt that God breathed on. Our very life comes from God. But we're made from the earth. Earth and heaven brought together in us. When we look in the mirror or when we look at each other sometimes, it can be difficult to remember the heavenly part. Right? We'd sometimes wonder what kind of dirt we are. How are we doing? Especially when life gets challenging. When we feel like we're in amongst the rocks, or we're getting walked on, or our life is tangled up with prickly thorns and weeds, which happens for everybody. We're not always good soil all the time, you and I. Sometimes life is pretty dirty, pretty messy. Sometimes the garden needs keeping, right? There's work to be done. Everyone here, you and me, everybody we know, everybody we've ever known faces difficulties, has challenges. Sometimes we're not able to lead the lives we wish we could. Sometimes life is hard for us. Sometimes we fall short of what we think would be the best thing to do. There are hard places and rocks and weeds and shallowness in our lives. None of us is perfect. And none of us, if we keep with this soil metaphor, none of us feels all the time like an ideal place for God's love to grow. But even so, the sower just keeps on tossing the seed out. More and more and more. Keeps offering us love. Maybe waiting for the time when the conditions will finally be right and that seed of love can crack open, take root, start to grow, and thrive in us. So this reminder that we are all earthly creatures, that we're all humans, should keep us humble. You like that? Humus, human, humble. It's all the same word. If we stay humble, we can maybe avoid some of the weedy tangles that come with judging other people. Looking at other people and saying, oh, they're dirtier than I am. They're earthier than I am. They're rockier than I am. There's more weeds in their life than mine. Well, so what? We're all dirt. We're good dirt, but we're dirt. I keep a little plaque in my office. It bears a quote by one of my literary heroes, a guy named Thomas Merton. If you read The Seven-Story Mountain, which is his autobiography, you discover that this guy who went on to be a priest and a monk and a Christian author that people all over the world read, there's a movement to make him into a saint. He had a terrible childhood. His parents were a mess. His family was a mess. He spent his early adulthood getting in trouble and sowing wild oats rather than the good seed that Jesus sowed. Eventually, though, the seeds of love took root. He went on to do some amazing things. Good things grew in his life. This is his quote that I love. He said, "Our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they are worthy." Our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they are worthy. In other words, it's not up to us to figure out whether they're good enough to love. Not our job. That's way above our pay grade. Also not very helpful to us to try to figure out, does that person deserve love? Is that one good enough? Is that what a waste of time. What a waste of energy. What a waste of our hearts. He goes on to say, that's not our business. And in fact, it's nobody's business. He says, what we are asked to do is love. And then I love this next part. This love itself will render both ourselves and our neighbors worthy. So it's not whether the dirt is good enough. It's whether the love is. And loving each other will make the dirt worthy. Makes us worthy, makes our neighbors worthy, because we're loved. So I love that, because it frees me from the nasty business of judging people, which I'm terrible at anyway. It frees me from trying to figure out whether someone deserves my kindness, my help, my attention. Because the truth is, I'm not qualified to judge. And it can twist me up on the inside to act like I am. For me to try to figure out whether someone is worth loving, what a waste of time. The sower of seed in Jesus' story, just chucking it everywhere, doesn't make judgments about where the seed should land. On the surface of it, this story is ridiculous, outrageous, extravagant, except if the sower of seeds has an endless supply. It's never going to run out. Maybe that's the point. That God's love is limitless, endless, meant for everyone, regardless of how much we want it, whether we're receptive to it, no matter what the world may think of us, no matter what we think of ourselves, no matter how we've been judged or how we've judged other people. How cool that is, that we don't have to worry about any of that. Don't have to worry about whether we're good enough for God's love, because we are. We just are. God is throwing seeds of love at us and everybody else all the time. What if you and I, what if we could grow to love like that? And to throw seeds of love like that with careless, reckless, wild abandon. Wouldn't that be something? Amen.